Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded cafeteria of Henderson High School, her lunch tray trembling slightly in her hands. The familiar knot in her stomach tightened as she scanned the room for an empty table. At 17, she had perfected the art of being invisible, moving through hallways like a ghost that nobody noticed or cared to acknowledge. "Watch where you're going, loser," sneered Jessica Walsh as Sarah accidentally brushed past her table. The popular girl's voice carried across the cafeteria, drawing snickers from her friends. Sarah's cheeks burned red, but she kept walking, her eyes fixed on the floor. This was her daily routine: endure the humiliation, find a corner, eat alone, and count the minutes until she could escape. Sarah found her usual spot in the far corner, next to the large windows overlooking the school parking lot. She unwrapped her peanut butter sandwich with mechanical precision, her mind already planning her route to avoid the popular kids after lunch. The whispers and pointed glances from nearby tables felt like needles pricking her skin. She had grown accustomed to being the target, the easy mark for anyone looking to feel better about themselves. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother: "Working late again tonight. Dinner money on the counter. Love you, sweetie." Sarah stared at the message, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness settle in her chest. Her mother, Linda, worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment, leaving Sarah to navigate the treacherous waters of high school mostly alone. Her father had left when she was 12, claiming he needed to find himself, leaving behind a daughter who blamed herself for his departure. The afternoon dragged on like every other day. In English class, Sarah sat in the back row, her worn notebook filled with detailed notes that nobody would ever ask to borrow. She raised her hand occasionally, only to be ignored by Mrs. Patterson, who seemed to favor the students who could afford designer clothes and expensive tutoring. Sarah's answers were always correct, but her voice was too quiet, her presence too forgettable to command attention. During chemistry lab, she was partnered with Marcus Webb, a quiet boy who stammered when nervous and wore the same 3 shirts in rotation. They worked well together, both understanding the unspoken rules of social invisibility. Neither tried to make conversation beyond the necessary exchange about their experiment. Sarah found comfort in these brief moments of shared silence, knowing that Marcus understood the weight of being overlooked without needing to discuss it. The final bell rang, releasing the students into the crisp October afternoon. Sarah gathered her books quickly, hoping to slip out before the hallways became too crowded. She had almost made it to the exit when she heard the dreaded sound of approaching footsteps behind her. "Hey, Martinez," called out Brad Thompson, the football team's quarterback and Jessica's boyfriend. Sarah's heart sank as she turned around, knowing that whatever came next wouldn't be pleasant. "My girlfriend says you bumped into her at lunch. Don't you think you owe her an apology?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She could feel the eyes of other students turning toward them, sensing drama like sharks detecting blood in the water. I'm sorry. It was an accident," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the noise of slamming lockers and chattering students. "What was that?" "I couldn't hear you," Brad said loudly, cupping his ear theatrically. His friends laughed, and Sarah felt her face burning with shame. She cleared her throat and tried again, slightly louder. "I said I'm sorry. It was an accident." "That's better," Brad smirked, but he wasn't finished. "You know, Martinez, maybe if you paid more attention to where you were going instead of living in your own little world, these accidents wouldn't happen. Some of us actually matter around here." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She nodded quickly, mumbled another apology, and hurried out of the building. The autumn air felt cold against her tear-stained cheeks as she walked the 6 blocks home to her apartment complex. The building was old and tired, with peeling paint and a front door that never quite closed properly. But it was home, and, more importantly, it was a place where she could be alone with her pain. Sarah climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B, her backpack feeling heavier with each step. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly from the day's accumulated stress. The apartment was small but clean, with mismatched furniture that her mother had collected from yard sales and thrift stores. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above their tiny electric fireplace, most of them featuring happier times when her father was still around. She dropped her backpack by the door and walked to the kitchen, where she found $20 and a note from her mother for dinner and tomorrow's lunch. Sorry, I can't be home tonight. The diner is short-staffed again. There's leftover pasta in the fridge. Love, Mom. Sarah crumpled the note, feeling guilty for the surge of resentment that washed over her. She knew her mother was doing her best, sacrificing her own comfort and social life to provide for them both. The apartment felt hollow without her mother's presence. Sarah heated up the leftover pasta and ate it while standing at the kitchen counter, staring out at the apartment complex's small courtyard where a few children played on rusty swing sets. She envied their carefree laughter, remembering a time when she too could find joy in simple pleasures before the weight of social rejection had crushed her spirit. After dinner, Sarah retreated to her small bedroom, where her most prized possessions waited for her. Hidden beneath her bed was a collection of military history books and biographies of famous soldiers. She had started reading them after her father left, initially hoping to understand why he had served 2 tours in Iraq before coming home changed and distant. What began as a search for answers about her father had evolved into a genuine fascination with military tactics, strategy, and the stories of brave men and women who had served their country. She pulled out her current read, Warrior Princess, Women in Combat, and settled onto her bed. As she read about female soldiers who had overcome incredible odds to serve in elite units, Sarah felt a familiar stirring in her chest. These women had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed, just like her. But they had found ways to prove their worth, to show the world that they were more than what others assumed them to be. Sarah's phone rang, startling her from her reading. The caller ID showed her best friend Rachel's name. Rachel had moved to California with her family the previous summer, leaving Sarah more isolated than ever. Their friendship had been Sarah's lifeline through middle school and the first 2 years of high school, providing her with someone who understood her struggles and accepted her for who she was. "Hey, Sar," Rachel's voice was warm and familiar, instantly making Sarah feel less alone. "How was school today?" Sarah hesitated, not wanting to burden her friend with the same old stories of humiliation and loneliness. "It was okay," she lied, settling back against her pillows. "Same as always, I guess." "Come on, I know you better than that," Rachel pressed gently. "You sound upset. What really happened?" Sarah found herself telling Rachel about the cafeteria incident and Brad's public humiliation of her. As she spoke, she could hear the anger growing in her friend's voice. "Sarah, you can't keep letting them treat you like this," Rachel said firmly. "You're smart, you're kind, and you're worth so much more than how they make you feel. Have you thought any more about what we talked about before I moved?" Before Rachel had left for California, they had spent many nights talking about their futures, their dreams of escaping Henderson and proving to everyone who had dismissed them that they were capable of extraordinary things. Rachel had encouraged Sarah to consider her interest in the military, pointing out that her physical fitness, intelligence, and determination could take her far in that field. "I've been thinking about it," Sarah admitted quietly. "I've been reading more about the military, especially about women in combat roles. It's just, I don't know if I'm brave enough. I can't even stand up to a high school bully." "Courage isn't about never being scared," Rachel replied. "It's about doing what needs to be done even when you are scared. You show courage every day just by getting up and facing another day at that horrible school." After they hung up, Sarah stared at the ceiling of her small bedroom, Rachel's words echoing in her mind. She thought about her father, who had served his country with honor before the war had changed him. She thought about the women in her books, who had faced discrimination and doubt but had persevered to serve in roles that were traditionally denied to them. And she thought about herself, trapped in a cycle of victimization and self-doubt, but possessing an inner strength that nobody at school could see. The next morning brought another gray October day, with clouds hanging low over Henderson like a suffocating blanket. Sarah dressed in her usual uniform of jeans and a plain sweater, clothes chosen for their ability to help her blend into the background. She grabbed her backpack, heavy with textbooks and dreams that felt impossible to achieve. The walk to school felt longer than usual as Sarah mentally prepared herself for another day of navigating the social minefield that was Henderson High. She passed the military recruiting office on Main Street, pausing for a moment to look at the posters in the window. Images of strong, confident soldiers in various uniforms stared back at her, their faces reflecting a sense of purpose and belonging that Sarah desperately craved. As she continued toward school, Sarah made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of entering through the main entrance where she might encounter Brad and his friends, she walked around to the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Chen had always been kind to Sarah, one of the few adults at school who seemed to see her as more than just another anonymous student. "Sarah," Mrs. Chen looked up from her desk with genuine warmth. "What brings you here so early?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling her heart racing. "I want to know about military programs. For after graduation. I want to know what it would take to join." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose with interest. She had been a guidance counselor for 15 years and had learned to recognize students who were ready for significant life changes. "That's a big decision, Sarah. What sparked this interest?" As Sarah began to explain her fascination with military history and her desire to serve her country, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. For the first time since her father had left, she could envision a future where she mattered, where her voice would be heard, where her strength would be recognized and valued. Mrs. Chen listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about Sarah's physical fitness, her grades, and her long-term goals. She pulled out several brochures and pamphlets explaining different military branches and the various programs available to high school graduates. "With your grades and your obvious dedication to physical fitness, you would be an excellent candidate for several programs," Mrs. Chen said encouragingly. "Have you considered the Navy? They have some exceptional opportunities for women, including some very challenging and rewarding special programs." Sarah's pulse quickened. She had read about Navy SEALs, the elite special operations forces who undertook the most dangerous and critical missions. Until recently, women had been excluded from these units, but that was beginning to change. The idea of pushing herself to the absolute limits of human endurance and capability both terrified and thrilled her. "Tell me about the Navy," Sarah said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. As Mrs. Chen explained the various Navy programs, from basic service to the most elite special operations units, Sarah felt a fire beginning to kindle in her chest. She thought about the years of humiliation, the constant feeling of powerlessness, and the way people looked right through her as if she didn't exist. But she also thought about the strength she had built through years of running alone through Henderson's empty streets, the determination she had developed through countless hours of studying while others partied, and the resilience she had forged through surviving each day in a world that seemed designed to break her spirit. The morning bell rang, interrupting their conversation. As Sarah gathered the brochures and pamphlets, Mrs. Chen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, whatever you decide to do with your future, remember that you have more strength than you realize. The challenges you've faced here have prepared you for bigger things than you can imagine." Walking to her first class, Sarah felt different somehow. The hallways looked the same, the students wore the same judgmental expressions, and the teachers maintained their practiced indifference. But something fundamental had shifted in Sarah's perspective. She was no longer just surviving each day, she was preparing for something greater. During lunch, instead of hiding in her usual corner, Sarah found herself studying the military brochures. She read about physical fitness requirements, educational benefits, and the various career paths available to those willing to serve. The more she read, the more determined she became to transform herself from the invisible girl that everyone overlooked into someone who could make a real difference in the world. That afternoon, Sarah stopped by the public library on her way home. She checked out every book she could find on military training, physical conditioning, and the history of women in combat roles. The elderly librarian, Mr. Patterson, seemed surprised by her selections but made no comment as he stamped the due dates in each book. At home, Sarah cleared off her small desk and arranged the library books alongside the brochures from Mrs. Chen. She opened a notebook and began creating what she decided to call her transformation plan. She listed her current physical capabilities, her academic strengths, and the areas where she needed improvement. She researched the specific requirements for various military programs, paying particular attention to the most challenging and elite units. As she worked, Sarah felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't experienced since childhood. She was no longer a victim of circumstances beyond her control, she was an agent of her own destiny, capable of creating the future she wanted through hard work and dedication. Her mother came home late that evening, exhausted from her double shift at the diner and the grocery store. Linda Martinez was only 35, but years of financial stress and single parenthood had added lines to her face and gray streaks to her dark hair. Despite her fatigue, she always made time to check on Sarah and ask about her day. "You seem different tonight," Linda observed as she joined Sarah at the kitchen table. "More focused, I guess. What are you working on?" Sarah looked up from her notebook, seeing her mother with fresh eyes. Linda had shown incredible strength and determination in rebuilding their lives after Sarah's father left. She had taken on multiple jobs, learned new skills, and sacrificed her own comfort to ensure that Sarah had everything she needed. If anyone would understand Sarah's desire to serve and prove herself, it would be her mother. "Mom, I want to join the military after graduation," Sarah said quietly, watching carefully for her mother's reaction. Linda was silent for a long moment, studying her daughter's face. She saw the determination there, the same steely resolve that had helped Sarah survive the difficulties of the past few years. She also saw something else, hope, genuine hope for the first time in years. "Tell me about it," Linda said simply, settling into the chair across from Sarah. As Sarah explained her plans, sharing the brochures and her research, Linda felt a mixture of pride and fear. She was proud of her daughter's strength and determination, but terrified of the dangers that military service could bring. She had seen what war had done to Sarah's father, how it had changed him from the loving, gentle man she had married into someone distant and haunted. "It's not an easy life," Linda said carefully. "Your father, the military gave him purpose, but it also took something from him that he never got back." "I know, Mom," Sarah replied. "I've thought about that. But I also know that I can't keep living the way I have been. I need to find out who I really am, what I'm really capable of. And I think this might be my chance to do something that matters." Linda reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. She saw the calluses from Sarah's daily runs and the strength in her grip, physical evidence of the determination that had kept Sarah going through the darkest times. "If this is what you really want," Linda said softly, "then I'll support you. But promise me you'll be careful, and promise me you'll remember that no matter how far you go or what you accomplish, you'll always have a home here with me." That night, as Sarah lay in bed reading about the grueling training that awaited military recruits, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She was still the same girl who got picked on at school, still the invisible nobody that others overlooked and dismissed. But now she had a plan, a direction, and, most importantly, a belief that she could become something more than what others expected of her. The transformation had begun, not in her appearance or her circumstances, but in her mind and her heart. Sarah Martinez was no longer content to be just a nobody. She was ready to begin the journey that would eventually shock everyone who thought they knew who she was and what she was capable of achieving. The transformation of Sarah Martinez began slowly, like the first light of dawn creeping across a darkened landscape. 3 months had passed since her conversation with Mrs. Chen, and the shy, invisible girl who once cowered in school hallways had begun to change in ways that nobody at Henderson High could yet perceive. Sarah's mornings now started at 4:30 a.m. with a run through the empty streets of her neighborhood. While her classmates slept peacefully in their comfortable beds, she pounded the pavement in worn sneakers, building the endurance and mental toughness that military service would demand. The cold October air had given way to the bitter chill of January, but Sarah welcomed the discomfort as preparation for the challenges that lay ahead. Her route took her past the houses of her tormentors, Brad Thompson's sprawling colonial with its perfectly manicured lawn, Jessica Walsh's modern two-story home with the luxury cars parked in the circular driveway. As she ran past these symbols of privilege and popularity, Sarah felt no envy or resentment, only a growing sense of purpose that separated her from the petty concerns of high school social hierarchies. The physical training was just one component of Sarah's preparation. She had thrown herself into her studies with renewed focus, raising her GPA from a respectable 3.2 to an impressive 3.7. Her teachers began to notice her increased participation in class discussions, though they attributed it to typical senior year maturity rather than the fundamental shift in mindset that was actually occurring. In advanced placement history, Sarah's essays on military strategy and leadership had caught the attention of Mr. Williams, a veteran himself who had served in Vietnam. He began staying after class to discuss her insights, impressed by her deep understanding of tactical concepts and her thoughtful analysis of historical conflicts. "You have an exceptional grasp of military thinking," Mr. Williams told her one afternoon as she gathered her books. "Have you considered studying military history in college?" Sarah smiled, knowing that her plans extended far beyond the academic study of warfare. "I'm thinking about a more hands-on approach to military service," she replied, enjoying the subtle surprise that crossed her teacher's face. The other students remained oblivious to Sarah's transformation. To them, she was still the same quiet girl who sat alone at lunch and never spoke unless directly addressed. They couldn't see the hours she spent in the school's weight room after classes ended, gradually building functional strength under the guidance of Coach Martinez, the wrestling coach who had taken an interest in her dedication. Coach Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, was a former Marine who recognized something special in the determined young woman who showed up every day to push herself beyond her limits. He had initially been skeptical when Sarah approached him about training, assuming she was another teenage girl looking to lose weight for prom. But her serious demeanor and genuine hunger for improvement had quickly changed his mind. "Most people think they want to be strong," Coach Martinez told her during one of their training sessions. "But when they realize what real strength costs, they find excuses to quit. You're different, Sarah. You understand that strength comes from embracing what others run from." Under his guidance, Sarah learned to execute perfect pull-ups, to carry heavy loads over long distances, and to push through the mental barriers that stopped most people from reaching their potential. Her body began to change, becoming leaner and more powerful, though she hid these changes under loose-fitting clothes that maintained her invisible status at school. The psychological preparation proved even more challenging than the physical training. Sarah spent hours researching the mental demands of military service, particularly the elite special operations units that had captured her imagination. She read accounts of SEAL training, learning about the psychological techniques used to break down civilian thinking and rebuild it with the mindset of a warrior. One particularly difficult evening in February, Sarah found herself struggling with doubt as she completed her homework. The constant pressure of maintaining her grades while pursuing her intense training regimen had begun to wear on her, and she questioned whether she truly had what it took to succeed in the military's most demanding programs. Her phone rang, and Rachel's name appeared on the screen. The weekly calls from her best friend had become a lifeline, providing Sarah with someone who understood her journey and could offer perspective during difficult moments. "You sound stressed," Rachel observed after they had exchanged greetings. "What's going on?" Sarah explained her doubts, her fear that she might be deluding herself about her capabilities. Rachel listened patiently, then shared news that put Sarah's challenges into perspective. "I'd been accepted to Stanford," Rachel announced. "Full scholarship. But, you know what? I'm terrified. I keep thinking about all the kids there who went to expensive prep schools and had tutors and advantages I never had. Then, I remember that I survived Henderson High, and if I can handle that, I can handle anything." The conversation reminded Sarah that everyone faced moments of self-doubt, even those who seemed to have clear paths to success. What mattered wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah's confidence continued to grow. She had contacted a Navy recruiter, Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams, who had been impressed by Sarah's preparation and determination. The recruiter had explained the various paths available to women in the Navy, including the possibility of attempting the rigorous selection process for special operations units. "The Navy SEALs have recently opened their training to women," Staff Sergeant Williams explained during one of their meetings. "It's extremely difficult, most men don't make it through. But, if you're serious about pushing yourself to the absolute limit, it's an option worth considering." Sarah felt her heart race at the possibility. The SEALs represented the pinnacle of military excellence, and the thought of attempting their legendary training program both terrified and thrilled her. She knew the statistics: less than 25% of candidates completed the initial training, and the numbers were even lower for the advanced programs that followed. At school, subtle changes in Sarah's behavior began to attract attention, though most students couldn't identify exactly what was different about her. She walked with more confidence, made more eye contact, and seemed less affected by the casual cruelties that had once devastated her. Jessica Walsh noticed the change first, her predator's instincts alerting her to the fact that her favorite victim was somehow becoming less vulnerable. During a typical hallway encounter in March, Jessica attempted her usual pattern of psychological warfare. "Nice outfit, Martinez," Jessica said loudly as Sarah passed her group of friends. "Did you get it from the bargain bin at Goodwill?" Instead of the usual red-faced stammering that Jessica expected, Sarah simply looked at her with calm, steady eyes. "Thanks for noticing," she replied evenly, then continued walking without breaking stride. The response was so unexpected that Jessica was left speechless, staring after Sarah with a confused expression. Her friends exchanged glances, unsure how to react to this new dynamic. Brad Thompson had a similar experience later that week when he tried to intimidate Sarah in the parking lot after school. Instead of the frightened compliance he was accustomed to, he found himself facing a young woman who stood straighter, spoke more clearly, and seemed utterly unimpressed by his attempts at dominance. "You know what, Brad?" Sarah said calmly as he blocked her path to her bicycle. "I used to be afraid of you. But you're just a kid playing games, and I don't have time for games anymore." She stepped around him with such quiet confidence that he found himself moving aside without really meaning to. As she rode away on her bike, Brad was left with the uncomfortable feeling that something fundamental had shifted in their dynamic, though he couldn't quite understand what had happened. The changes in Sarah's interactions with her tormentors were just surface manifestations of a deeper transformation. She had begun to see herself not as a victim of circumstances, but as someone preparing for a purpose that transcended high school drama. The opinions of teenagers who had never faced real challenges seemed increasingly irrelevant compared to the standards she was setting for herself. Her mother noticed the changes as well, watching with a mixture of pride and concern as her daughter evolved before her eyes. Linda had grown accustomed to coming home to find Sarah studying military manuals or completing workout routines in their small living room. The quiet, withdrawn girl who had once seemed crushed by the world's indifference was being replaced by someone who radiated quiet strength and determination. "You seem so much older lately," Linda observed one evening as they shared dinner. "More serious, more focused. Sometimes I wonder if you're missing out on being a teenager." Sarah considered her mother's words carefully. She knew that her classmates spent their evenings at parties, football games, and other social events that had once seemed impossibly out of reach. But those activities no longer held any appeal for her. She had glimpsed a larger world with higher stakes and more meaningful challenges. "I don't feel like I'm missing anything, Mom," Sarah replied honestly. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just trying to survive each day." The spring semester brought new challenges as Sarah balanced her final high school courses with increasingly demanding physical training. Coach Martinez had introduced advanced combat fitness exercises, preparing her for the military's physical readiness tests. She learned to climb ropes, carry heavy packs over long distances, and maintain performance standards even when exhausted. Her academic performance continued to improve as well. The discipline she had developed through military-style training carried over into her studies, helping her maintain focus and motivation even when the material was difficult or boring. Teachers who had barely noticed her for 3 years suddenly found themselves impressed by her insightful questions and thorough preparation. Mrs. Patterson, her English teacher, pulled her aside after class one day with a look of genuine puzzlement. "Sarah, I have to ask, what's gotten into you this year? Your essays have become incredibly sophisticated, and your class participation has improved dramatically. Are you working with a tutor?" "No tutors," Sarah replied with a slight smile. "I've just found my motivation, I guess." As the spring semester progressed, Sarah began to feel increasingly disconnected from her high school environment. The concerns that dominated her classmates' lives, prom dates, college acceptance letters, senior pranks, seemed trivial compared to the challenges she was preparing to face. She found herself counting down the days until graduation, not because she was eager to escape, but because she was ready to begin the next phase of her journey. The disconnect became particularly apparent during lunch periods, when Sarah would sit alone reading military memoirs while surrounded by teenagers discussing social media drama and weekend party plans. She had moved beyond seeking acceptance from her peers. Their approval or disapproval no longer held any power over her sense of self-worth. One afternoon in April, as Sarah completed her daily run through downtown Henderson, she encountered a group of her classmates hanging out near the town square. Among them were Brad Thompson and Jessica Walsh, along with several others who had participated in years of systematic humiliation. As she jogged past, she heard Jessica call out mockingly, "Look, it's Marathon Martinez. Still running away from your problems?" Sarah slowed to a stop and turned to face the group. 6 months earlier, such an encounter would have sent her fleeing in tears. Now, she felt only a mild curiosity about why these people had once seemed so powerful and intimidating. "Actually," she said clearly, her breathing barely elevated despite the 5-mile run she had just completed, "I'm running toward my future. You should try it sometime." The simplicity and confidence of her response left the group momentarily speechless. Sarah nodded politely and resumed her run, leaving behind a cluster of teenagers who suddenly felt very young and very small. As graduation approached, Sarah's preparations intensified. She had completed her enlistment paperwork and was scheduled to begin Navy basic training just 2 weeks after the graduation ceremony. Staff Sergeant Williams had arranged for her to take the preliminary fitness assessments, which she passed easily thanks to months of dedicated training. The physical achievements were significant, but the mental transformation was even more profound. Sarah had developed the ability to remain calm under pressure, to push through discomfort and fatigue, and to maintain focus on long-term goals despite short-term obstacles. These qualities would serve her well in the challenges that lay ahead. Her final weeks at Henderson High took on a surreal quality. Sarah felt like she was watching her former life from a distance, observing the drama and excitement of senior year activities with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying an alien culture. She participated when necessary, attending required assemblies, completing final projects, posing for yearbook photos, but her mind was already focused on the next chapter of her life. The yearbook photos were particularly poignant. The professional photographer had captured something different in Sarah's expression, a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the fearful, withdrawn girl who had appeared in previous years' photos. Her classmates might not have noticed the change, but it was clearly visible to anyone who cared to look closely. During the final week of classes, Mrs. Chin called Sarah to her office for a last conversation before graduation. The guidance counselor who had first encouraged Sarah's military interests wanted to check on her progress and offer final words of encouragement. "You've changed so much this year," Mrs. Chen observed as Sarah settled into the familiar chair across from her desk. "When you first came to me about military service, you were seeking escape from your circumstances. Now you seem to be pursuing something much more positive." "I learned that you can't run away from yourself," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "But you can choose to become someone different, someone stronger. The military gave me a framework for that transformation." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. She had worked with thousands of students over the years, and she had learned to recognize those who possessed the special combination of intelligence, determination, and character needed for extraordinary achievements. Sarah Martinez had developed all three qualities in abundance. As their conversation concluded, Mrs. Chen offered one final piece of advice. "Remember that the strength you've built here will serve you well wherever you go. And remember that no matter how far your journey takes you, you started right here in Henderson, overcoming challenges that would have defeated most people." Walking out of Mrs. Chen's office for the last time, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the woman who had helped her envision a different future. She also felt ready to leave Henderson High behind, not in anger or bitterness, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. The girl who had once been afraid of her own shadow was about to step into a world where courage, determination, and excellence were not just valued but demanded. Sarah Martinez was ready for that world, and, more importantly, that world was about to discover what she was truly capable of achieving. The transformation from civilian to warrior began the moment Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Naval Station Great Lakes. The humid Illinois air hit her like a wall as she joined the line of nervous recruits, their civilian clothes and uncertain expressions marking them as the raw material from which sailors would be forged. Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation rather than fear as drill instructors began their initial assessment of the new arrivals. 8 weeks of basic training passed in a blur of physical challenges, academic instruction, and psychological pressure designed to break down individual ego and rebuild it with military discipline. Sarah excelled in ways that surprised even her instructors, demonstrating not only the physical fitness she had developed during her final year of high school, but also a mental toughness that set her apart from her peers. Petty Officer Richards, her primary drill instructor, noticed Sarah's exceptional performance early in the training cycle. While other recruits struggled with the early morning physical training sessions, Sarah attacked each exercise with an intensity that bordered on aggression. Her pull-ups were perfect, her run times consistently in the top percentile, and her ability to maintain performance under stress impressed even the most skeptical instructors. Martinez, Petty Officer Richards called her aside after a particularly grueling obstacle course exercise. "Where did you train before coming here? You move like someone who's been preparing for this for years." Henderson, Illinois, Petty Officer, Sarah replied in the crisp manner they had been taught. "I trained myself, mostly. I wanted to be ready." The drill instructor studied her carefully. He had trained thousands of recruits over his 15-year career, and he had learned to identify those with the potential for elite service. Sarah Martinez possessed something rare, the combination of physical capability, mental fortitude, and quiet determination that marked future special operations candidates. The academic portions of basic training proved equally manageable for Sarah. Her years of disciplined study habits served her well as she absorbed information about naval history, military law, and the technical skills required for modern warfare. She scored in the top 5% on every examination, earning recognition as an honor graduate candidate. But it was during the psychological evaluations that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The military psychiatrists who assessed each recruit for potential special assignments found her responses remarkably mature for someone fresh out of high school. Her psychological profile indicated exceptional stress tolerance, strong leadership potential, and the kind of focused determination needed for the most challenging military roles. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the Navy psychologist who conducted Sarah's final evaluation, was particularly intrigued by her subject's combination of humility and confidence. Most high-performing recruits displayed either arrogance about their abilities or excessive deference to authority. Sarah demonstrated something rarer, a realistic assessment of her own capabilities combined with an unwavering commitment to exceeding them. "Tell me about your goals in the Navy, Dr." Hendricks asked during their session. Sarah considered her response carefully. She had learned to be honest about her ambitions without appearing presumptuous. "I want to serve in whatever capacity best utilizes my abilities, Doctor. I'm particularly interested in challenging assignments that make a real difference." "Are you familiar with naval special warfare?" Dr. Hendricks inquired, watching Sarah's reaction closely. "Yes, Doctor. I've studied their mission and requirements extensively. I believe I have the potential to contribute to their operations, if given the opportunity." Dr. Hendricks made detailed notes about Sarah's response. The young woman's combination of preparation, confidence, and measured ambition was exactly what special operations recruiters looked for in potential candidates. Upon graduation from basic training, Sarah received orders that surprised many of her fellow recruits. Instead of being assigned to a ship or shore station for traditional naval duties, she was selected for advanced individual training at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in California, the home of SEAL training. The bus ride from Great Lakes to California gave Sarah time to process the magnitude of what lay ahead. She was about to attempt one of the most challenging military training programs in the world, one that had been closed to women for decades. The statistical reality was sobering. Fewer than 25% of male candidates completed the initial phase of SEAL training, and no woman had yet succeeded in earning the coveted Trident pin that marked a fully qualified SEAL operator. Coronado's sun-bleached buildings and endless Pacific horizon provided a stark contrast to the industrial landscape of Great Lakes. As Sarah reported to the Naval Special Warfare Center, she felt the weight of history and expectation settling on her shoulders. She was not just representing herself, but breaking barriers that had stood for generations. The first surprise came during her initial meeting with the training cadre. Instead of the hostile reception she had anticipated, Sarah found herself facing professionals who seemed genuinely interested in her success. Commander James Sullivan, the officer in charge of candidate evaluation, reviewed her file with evident approval. "Impressive scores across the board, Martinez," he noted, flipping through her records. Your fitness levels are in the top tier, and your psychological evaluations suggest exceptional resilience. But, you understand that this program will test you in ways that no civilian training can prepare you for? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. I'm ready for that test. Commander Sullivan studied her carefully. He had overseen the training of hundreds of SEAL candidates, and he had developed an intuition for identifying those who possessed the mysterious combination of qualities needed for success. Physical fitness could be measured, academic ability could be tested, but the indefinable mental toughness required for special operations could only be assessed under extreme stress. The program you're entering is officially called Basic Underwater Demolition/SEAL Training, or BUD/S, he explained. It consists of 3 phases over approximately 6 months. Phase 1 focuses on physical conditioning and mental stress. Phase 2 covers diving and underwater operations. Phase 3 teaches land warfare and weapons training. Each phase has a high attrition rate, and candidates can be eliminated at any time for performance or medical reasons. Sarah nodded, absorbing the information she had studied countless times but now hearing described by someone who had lived it. You'll be the only woman in your class, Commander Sullivan continued. That means you'll face scrutiny and pressure that your male classmates won't experience. Some people will be rooting for you to succeed, others will be waiting for you to fail. Your job is to ignore all of that and focus on meeting the standards expected of every candidate. The initial weeks of BUD/S training were unlike anything Sarah had experienced, despite her extensive preparation. The physical demands were relentless, multiple daily training sessions that pushed every candidate to their breaking point and beyond. Swimming in the frigid Pacific Ocean, endless runs on soft beach sand, obstacle courses that tested both strength and coordination, and calisthenics sessions that seemed designed to induce muscle failure. But the physical challenges were only part of the equation. The instructors used psychological pressure techniques designed to identify those who would break under stress. Sleep deprivation, constant scrutiny, impossible time standards, and verbal harassment were all part of the program's methodology for eliminating those who lacked the mental fortitude for special operations. Sarah's approach to these challenges reflected the quiet determination she had developed during her high school years. While some candidates responded to pressure with anger or defiance, and others with visible fear or desperation, she maintained a steady focus on simply meeting whatever standard was set before her. She didn't seek to dominate or impress, she simply refused to quit. Her classmates initially treated her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Most had never trained alongside a woman in such an intensive environment, and they weren't sure what to expect. Some seemed to assume she would receive special treatment or lower standards, while others appeared to resent her presence as a disruption to traditional male bonding. But Sarah's performance quickly earned their respect. When the instructors demanded 50 push-ups, she delivered 50 perfect repetitions. When they required a 6-minute mile run in boots and utilities, she finished in the required time. When they assigned swimming distances that left strong men gasping, she completed them with energy to spare. More importantly, she demonstrated the kind of quiet leadership that instructors valued. When weaker candidates struggled during team exercises, Sarah helped them without drawing attention to herself. When the pressure mounted and some classmates began to crack, she remained steady and supportive. She understood that SEAL training was not just about individual performance, but about forging operators who could function effectively as part of a team. The notorious Hell Week arrived during the 6th week of Phase 1 training. For 5.5 days, candidates would be allowed only minimal sleep while facing continuous physical and mental challenges. It was the make or break point of SEAL training, where roughly half of all candidates either quit voluntarily or were eliminated for medical reasons. Hell Week began on a Sunday evening with surf torture, candidates lying in the frigid Pacific surf while instructors shouted instructions and encouraged them to quit. The water temperature was 58 degrees, cold enough to induce hypothermia within minutes. Sarah felt the shock of the icy water hit her system, but she had prepared for this moment through countless cold showers and ice baths during her high school training. As the hours passed and the sun set over the Pacific, candidates began to succumb to the combined effects of cold, fatigue, and psychological pressure. The instructors prowled among the shivering trainees, offering hot coffee and warm blankets to anyone willing to ring the brass bell that marked voluntary withdrawal from training. "Martinez," one instructor called out as Sarah lay motionless in the surf, "you don't have to prove anything to anyone. No one expects a girl to make it through this. You can ring out right now and still hold your head high." Sarah didn't respond verbally. She simply adjusted her position slightly and continued staring straight ahead, her mind focused on the warmth of the Illinois summers when she had run through Henderson streets, building the foundation for this moment. The first night of Hell Week claimed 12 candidates. By dawn, the class had been reduced from its starting number of 180 to 131. Sarah remained, looking exhausted but determined as the instructors began the next phase of challenges. The following days blurred together in a haze of boat carries, log exercises, sand runs, and constant harassment. Candidates were allowed only brief catnaps between events, never enough to truly rest but just sufficient to keep them functional. The instructors rotated in fresh shifts, ensuring that their energy levels remained high while the candidates grew increasingly depleted. Sarah's strategy during Hell Week was simple: break each challenge down into manageable segments and focus only on the immediate task at hand. When carrying heavy logs with her boat crew, she concentrated on her next step rather than the miles ahead. When performing calisthenics in the sand, she counted repetitions rather than dwelling on her growing fatigue. Her boat crew, initially skeptical about having a woman as part of their team, began to rely on her steady performance and quiet encouragement. Boat Crew 7, as they were designated, developed a reputation for consistent performance and mutual support that earned notice from the instructors. "She's carrying her weight," observed Chief Petty Officer Morrison as he watched Sarah's crew navigate a particularly difficult surf passage. "Hell, she's carrying more than her weight. That girl's got something special." The comment reached Commander Sullivan, who had been monitoring Sarah's progress carefully. The program's leadership had been under intense scrutiny regarding the integration of women into SEAL training, and they needed candidates who could succeed on merit rather than politics. Wednesday night of Hell Week brought the infamous Around the World Paddle, a boat exercise that took crews on a grueling journey around Coronado Island in the dark Pacific waters. Waves, wind, and fatigue conspired to make the event one of the most difficult challenges of the week. Boat Crew 7's rubber boat took on water repeatedly as they fought through swells that seemed designed to capsize a their small craft. Sarah's paddle work remained strong and rhythmic even as several of her crewmates began to falter from exhaustion. When one teammate, Rodriguez, began to show signs of serious fatigue, she quietly adjusted her position to take on more of the paddling burden. "I can't keep up," Rodriguez gasped as they rounded the halfway point of the course. "Yes, you can," Sarah replied calmly, never breaking her paddle rhythm. "We all finish together, or none of us finish. Just follow my stroke." Her quiet confidence and practical support helped Rodriguez find the strength to continue. The crew completed the evolution as a unit, earning recognition from the instructors for their teamwork under pressure. By Friday morning of Hell Week, the class had been reduced to 87 candidates. Sarah remained among them, looking exhausted but maintaining the same steady demeanor she had displayed throughout training. Her uniform was caked with sand, her face was drawn with fatigue, but her eyes still held the determined focus that had carried her through years of preparation. The final challenge of Hell Week was a beach run that took the surviving candidates on a tour of their accomplishment. As they jogged along the Pacific coastline in the early morning light, Sarah felt a profound sense of achievement. She had not just survived one of the military's most demanding selection processes, she had thrived. Hell Week concluded with a traditional ceremony where candidates received their brown t-shirts, marking their transition from trainees to serious SEAL candidates. As Commander Sullivan placed the shirt in Sarah's hands, he offered a rare smile. "Outstanding performance, Martinez," he said quietly. "You've earned your place here." The weeks following Hell Week brought new challenges as the class entered the diving phase of training. Sarah excelled in the underwater environment, demonstrating the calm precision needed for combat diving operations. Her swimming background served her well as she mastered techniques for underwater navigation, demolition, and reconnaissance. But it was during the land warfare phase that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The combination of tactical thinking, physical endurance, and leadership skills that had been developing since her high school years came together in a remarkable display of capability. She mastered weapons systems quickly, demonstrated excellent marksmanship, and showed an intuitive understanding of small unit tactics. Her instructors began to take particular notice during field exercises. Sarah's ability to remain calm under pressure, think strategically while exhausted, and inspire confidence in her teammates marked her as someone with genuine leadership potential. During one memorable training scenario, Sarah's squad was tasked with conducting a simulated reconnaissance mission behind enemy lines. When the squad leader was wounded early in the exercise, command naturally fell to Sarah despite her status as one of the junior members of the group. Under her leadership, the squad successfully completed their primary mission while adapting to several unexpected complications introduced by the instructors. Her calm decision-making and clear communication earned praise from the evaluators and the respect of her teammates. "That woman has what it takes," observed Master Chief Petty Officer Davis as he reviewed the exercise results. "She doesn't just meet standards, she sets them." As BUD/S training approached its conclusion, Sarah found herself part of a select group of candidates who had not only survived the program but excelled in it. Of the original 180 candidates who had started training, only 37 remained. Among them was the quiet girl from Henderson, Illinois, who had transformed herself into something extraordinary. The graduation ceremony for BUD/S Class 247 was attended by senior Navy leadership, family members, and representatives from the Special Operations community. As Sarah received her certificate of completion and the symbolic Trident pin that marked her as a qualified SEAL operator, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the frightened girl who had hidden in high school bathrooms, the lonely teenager who had eaten lunch by herself while others mocked her appearance, the invisible nobody who had seemed destined for a life of quiet desperation. That girl had found the strength to dream of something better and the determination to make that dream reality. Commander Sullivan administered the SEAL Creed to the graduating class, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and brotherhood that connected them to decades of warriors who had worn the Trident before them. Sarah's voice joined with those of her classmates as they pledged themselves to the values that would guide their service. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered to congratulate the new SEALs, Sarah stood apart for a moment, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that had tested her so severely. She was no longer the powerless victim who had once defined herself by others' opinions. She was Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEAL, ready to serve her country in whatever capacity her training and determination could best be utilized. The transformation was complete, but the true test of what she had become was yet to come. The world was about to discover what happened when a nobody became somebody extraordinary, armed with skills and confidence that would shock everyone who thought they knew what she was capable of achieving. 5 years had passed since Petty Officer Sarah Martinez graduated from BUD/S training and earned her SEAL Trident. Those years had been filled with deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and classified locations across the globe, where she had proven herself repeatedly in the crucible of combat operations. The shy girl from Henderson, Illinois, had evolved into Chief Petty Officer Martinez, a veteran special operations warrior with multiple commendations for valor and leadership under fire. But now, as she walked through the familiar hallways of Henderson High School on a crisp October morning, Sarah felt an odd disconnect between her past and present selves. She had returned home for her 10-year high school reunion, an event she had initially planned to skip before her mother convinced her that some chapters needed proper closure. The school looked smaller than she remembered, its hallways narrower and less intimidating than they had seemed to a frightened 17-year-old. The same faded motivational posters hung on the walls, and the same institutional smell of cleaning supplies and teenage anxiety filled the air. But Sarah walked through these spaces with the measured confidence of someone who had faced genuine life and death situations and emerged victorious. She wore civilian clothes, simple jeans, a plain sweater, and comfortable walking shoes that gave no hint of her military background. To any casual observer, she appeared to be just another former student returning to reminisce about old times. The muscular definition earned through years of intense training was hidden beneath her modest clothing, and her bearing, while confident, carried none of the obvious markers that might identify her as a special operations warrior. The reunion event was scheduled for that evening, but Sarah had arrived early to walk through the school and process the memories that these hallways held. Principal Jenkins, who had barely noticed her during her student years, greeted her warmly in the main office, clearly pleased to have any alumnus show interest in returning to Henderson High. "Sarah Martinez," he said, consulting his list of expected attendees. "I have to admit, I don't recall you very well from your time here. Were you involved in many activities?" Sarah smiled at the question, finding dark humor in its innocence. "Not particularly," she replied. "I was pretty focused on my studies and planning for the future." As she continued her tour of the building, Sarah encountered several teachers who had been part of her high school experience. Mrs. Patterson, her former English teacher, was preparing her classroom for Monday's lessons when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Excuse me," Mrs. Patterson said, looking up from her papers. "Are you here for the reunion? I'm afraid the building isn't officially open to visitors yet." "I'm Sarah Martinez," she replied, watching for recognition that didn't come. "I was in your AP English class about 10 years ago." Mrs. Patterson studied her carefully, clearly struggling to place the confident young woman before her with any of her former students. "I'm sorry, dear," she admitted finally. "I teach so many students over the years. Could you remind me about yourself?" The question encapsulated everything about Sarah's high school experience. She had been so invisible, so thoroughly forgettable, that even her teachers couldn't remember her presence in their classrooms. Rather than feeling hurt by this recognition, Sarah found it liberating. She was no longer defined by who she had been or how others had perceived her. "I was pretty quiet," Sarah said diplomatically. "I spent most of my time preparing for military service. I enlisted in the Navy right after graduation." Mrs. Patterson's expression brightened with interest. "Oh, how wonderful! Did you enjoy your time in the service?" "I'm still serving, actually," Sarah replied. "I'm a chief petty officer in Naval Special Warfare." The term meant nothing to Mrs. Patterson, who nodded politely without understanding the significance of what Sarah had just revealed. Naval Special Warfare was the bureaucratic designation for the SEAL community, but, to civilian ears, it sounded like any other military job. Sarah continued her walk through the building, visiting the cafeteria where she had eaten so many lonely lunches, the library where she had hidden during free periods, and the gymnasium where she had endured the humiliation of being chosen last for every team activity. Each location held memories of pain and isolation, but, viewing them through the lens of her current life, Sarah felt only compassion for the girl she had been and pride in the woman she had become. As the afternoon progressed, other alumni began arriving for the evening's festivities. Sarah watched from a distance as her former classmates reunited with loud exclamations and enthusiastic hugs. The social hierarchies that had dominated their teenage years seemed to have softened somewhat, but the basic patterns remained recognizable. Jessica Walsh, now Jessica Thornton according to her name tag, had maintained her position as the center of attention. She wore expensive clothes and jewelry that announced her continued membership in Henderson's social elite. Her husband owned a successful car dealership, and she spent her days managing their large home and organizing charity events that enhanced their social standing. Brad Thompson had returned wearing a Letterman jacket that no longer quite fit his expanding waistline. He worked for his father's construction company and coached the high school football team, living in the perpetual glow of his teenage athletic achievements. His conversation still revolved around the glory days when he had been Henderson High's golden boy. Sarah observed these reunions with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying familiar but foreign customs. The concerns that animated her former classmates, mortgage payments, children's soccer leagues, local political drama, seemed insignificant compared to the life and death decisions that filled her professional world. As evening approached and the official reunion began in the decorated gymnasium, Sarah found herself gravitating toward the edges of the celebration. She spoke politely with anyone who approached her, but most conversations were brief and superficial. Her classmates had trouble reconciling their memories of the invisible girl with the confident woman before them, though they couldn't quite identify what had changed. The reunions program included the traditional memorial for deceased classmates, class superlatives announcement, and a slideshow of yearbook photos that drew laughter and nostalgic comments from the crowd. Sarah watched the images of her former self flash across the screen, a series of awkward school photos showing a girl who looked like she was trying to disappear into the background. My God, is that really you? Sarah turned to find Marcus Webb approaching her table. Her former chemistry lab partner looked much as she remembered him, though success in the tech industry had given him confidence that had been absent during their teenage years. He studied her with genuine amazement. Marcus, Sarah said warmly, pleased to see the one person from her high school years who had shown her genuine kindness. You look like you're doing well. I am, thanks, he replied, still staring at her in wonder. But, wow. You're completely different. What happened to you after graduation? Before Sarah could answer, their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front of the gymnasium. Jessica Thornton had taken the microphone to address the gathered alumni, her voice carrying the same imperious tone that had once terrorized cafeteria tables. I want to take a moment to recognize some of our classmates who have achieved special distinction since graduation, Jessica announced, consulting a prepared list. Brad Thompson has been named Henderson's Coach of the Year for 3 consecutive seasons. Lisa Parker completed her medical residency at Northwestern and is now practicing pediatrics in Chicago. And David Chen recently opened his 3rd restaurant location in the state. The list continued with achievements that impressed the local community, successful businesses, advanced degrees, prominent positions in Henderson's social and economic hierarchy. Sarah listened without resentment, recognizing that these accomplishments mattered greatly to people whose lives remained centered in their hometown. Now, Jessica continued, I'd like to ask if anyone has updates about classmates who couldn't join us tonight. Sometimes people move away and we lose touch, but their stories are still part of our class history. The request opened the floor for various updates about absent classmates who had scattered across the country pursuing different paths. Stories were shared about marriages, children, career changes, and other milestones that marked the passage of time since graduation. What about Sarah Martinez? Called out a voice from the back of the room. Sarah felt a moment of surprise as heads turned to look for her. She hadn't expected anyone to remember her well enough to inquire about her current status. Sarah Martinez? Jessica repeated, consulting her class list with a puzzled expression. I'm not sure I remember. She was in our class, the voice continued. It belonged to Timothy Rogers, a quiet student who had also occupied the social periphery during high school. She usually sat alone at lunch. I think she might be here tonight. The gymnasium fell silent as people looked around, trying to identify which of the women present might be the Sarah Martinez in question. The name stirred vague memories for some, but few could conjure a clear image of the girl they were discussing. I remember her now, said another classmate. Really quiet, kind of invisible. I think she got picked on a lot. Sarah felt the moment crystallizing around her as she realized that this was the choice point she had unconsciously been waiting for. She could remain silent and anonymous, allowing her former classmates to continue their speculative conversation about the forgettable girl they barely remembered. Or she could step forward and reveal what that invisible nobody had become. Marcus, sitting beside her, looked at her with questioning eyes. What are you going to do? He whispered. Sarah considered her options for a moment longer, then made her decision. She stood up slowly, her movement drawing attention from nearby tables. The gesture rippled outward as more people noticed the confident woman rising from her seat in the back corner of the gymnasium. I'm Sarah Martinez, she said clearly, her voice carrying the command presence she had developed through years of leading dangerous operations. The announcement stopped all conversation in the room as hundreds of eyes focused on her with surprise and curiosity. Jessica stared at her with obvious shock, struggling to reconcile this self-assured woman with any memory of her high school classmates. Are you sure? I don't remember you looking like. I've changed, Sarah replied simply, walking toward the front of the room with measured steps. Her movement through the crowd drew whispers and stares as former classmates tried to process this unexpected revelation. Brad Thompson watched her approach with a puzzled expression that slowly gave way to recognition. Wait a minute, he said loudly. You're that weird girl who never talked to anyone. What happened to you? The question hung in the air as Sarah reached the front of the gymnasium and gently took the microphone from Jessica's unresisting hand. She looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her, seeing curiosity, skepticism, and, in some cases, the same casual cruelty that had defined her high school experience. "You want to know what happened to me?" Sarah repeated Brad's question, her voice now amplified throughout the gymnasium. "I decided to stop being a victim." She paused, allowing the words to register with her audience. "I spent 4 years in this building being ignored, dismissed, and treated like I didn't matter. Some of you made my life miserable just because you could. Others simply pretended I didn't exist." The gymnasium had become completely silent now, with even the reunion organizers stopping their activities to listen to this unexpected confession. "But, instead of letting that define me," Sarah continued, "I used it as motivation to become something better. I enlisted in the Navy 2 weeks after graduation and spent the last 10 years serving my country in ways that most of you couldn't imagine." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small object that gleamed gold in the gymnasium's fluorescent lighting. Holding up her SEAL trident for the room to see, she continued with quiet pride. "I'm Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. I've completed 3 combat deployments, led special operations missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and earned decorations for valor under fire. The nobody that you forgot about became somebody who stands between you and the people who want to destroy our way of life." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Gasps and whispers erupted from the crowd as people struggled to process the impossibility of what they were hearing. The invisible girl from their memories had become one of the military's most elite warriors, a member of a community so exclusive that most people never encountered a genuine SEAL in their entire lives. Jessica's face had gone white with shock, while Brad Thompson stared at Sarah as if seeing a ghost from an alternate universe. Other classmates looked at each other with expressions of disbelief, trying to reconcile their memories with this stunning revelation. "I didn't come here tonight to humiliate anyone or to settle old scores," Sarah said, her voice remaining steady and professional. "I came to close a chapter of my life and to remind myself how far I've traveled from the frightened girl I used to be." She handed the microphone back to Jessica, whose hands trembled as she accepted it. "I want you all to remember something," Sarah said, no longer needing amplification to command the room's attention. "Every person you ignore, every kid you pick on, every nobody you dismiss, they have the potential to become extraordinary. You just have to be wise enough to see it, and kind enough to help them along the way." With that final observation, Sarah turned and walked toward the gymnasium exit, leaving behind a room full of people who would never again see the world quite the same way. The confident stride that carried her through the doors was the same one that had led her through combat zones and dangerous missions around the globe. Marcus Webb caught up with her in the parking lot, where Sarah was walking toward her rental car under the clear October sky. "That was incredible," he said, slightly breathless from hurrying after her. "I can't believe you're actually a Navy SEAL. I mean, I always knew you were stronger than people realized, but this." Sarah smiled at his amazement. "I'm still the same person, Marcus. I just finally figured out what I was capable of." "Are you going back to active duty?" he asked. "I have 2 more years on my current contract," she replied. "After that, I'm not sure. Maybe I'll stay in and try for senior enlisted leadership. Maybe I'll transition to civilian life and find new ways to serve. The future is full of possibilities now." As she drove away from Henderson High School for what she suspected might be the last time, Sarah reflected on the evening's events. The revelation of her identity had been more satisfying than she had expected, not because it had shocked her former tormentors, but because it had demonstrated the power of transformation and the danger of underestimating others. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother, who was waiting at home to hear about the reunion. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "It went perfectly, Mom. I remembered who I used to be and celebrated who I've become. Coming home now." The drive through Henderson's quiet streets took her past the recruiting office where she had first learned about military opportunities, the library where she had researched Navy programs, and the park where she had run countless miles preparing for the challenges ahead. Each location held memories of the girl who had dared to dream of something better and, then, found the courage to pursue that dream. Back at the reunion, the revelation of Sarah's transformation had become the dominant topic of conversation. Classmates who had never given her a second thought during high school now found themselves discussing her journey with amazement and, in some cases, genuine admiration. "I can't believe we went to school with a Navy SEAL," someone said. "Did you see how she carried herself? That wasn't the same person at all." Makes you think about how we treated people back then, doesn't it? Jessica Thornton found herself in the unusual position of being upstaged at her own social gathering. The confident dismissal with which she had once treated Sarah now seemed petty and short-sighted in light of what that quiet girl had accomplished. Brad Thompson was perhaps the most affected by the evening's revelation. His entire sense of self had been built around his status as Henderson High's golden boy, the athlete who had peaked in high school and spent the subsequent decade reliving his glory days. Confronted with evidence of genuine achievement and heroism, his own accomplishments seemed suddenly diminished. But, for most of the alumni present, Sarah's story served as an inspiring reminder that people could transcend their circumstances and achieve things that seemed impossible. The nobody that they had overlooked had become somebody extraordinary, armed with skills and experiences that they could barely comprehend. As the reunion wound down and people began to leave, many carried with them a new understanding of the potential that exists in every person, even those who seem invisible or insignificant. Sarah Martinez had given them a gift that night, the knowledge that transformation was possible and that true strength often developed in the people who faced the greatest challenges. The girl who had once hidden in bathroom stalls to avoid her tormentors had become a warrior who ran toward danger when others fled from it. The teenager who had been dismissed as weak and forgettable had evolved into someone who could be trusted with the most critical missions her nation could assign. Sarah Martinez, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy SEALs, drove home through the Illinois night, no longer a nobody but someone whose very existence proved that extraordinary things could grow from the most ordinary beginnings. The transformation was complete, and the world had finally seen what she had always been capable of becoming.